In the shadowed recesses of my temple, hidden from the prying eyes of the sun and the ignorant masses who worshipped its warmth, I stood over the ancient text carved into a stele of obsidian. My heart pulsed with dark desire as I traced the hieroglyphs that detailed the arcane rituals to raise the dead. Each stroke of my finger was a vow whispered in the tongue of the old gods, an incantation to resurrect my beloved Neferet and vengeance upon the Pharaoh who had stolen her life. I was Anhotek, the forgotten high priest of Osiris, cast aside by Ramses Roman II for practicing forbidden arts. But my true power lay not in the blessings of the state or the Pharaoh's favor, but in the cold, unyielding secrets buried beneath the sands of time. And with those secrets, I would bring forth an age of darkness and despair upon Egypt. Neferet had been my light, my joy, my lover. A dancer of unparalleled grace, her laughter could outshine any jewel, and her smile was sweeter than honeyed wine. But she was also a spy for the Pharaoh, whispering secrets into his ear while she warmed his bed at night. When Ramses discovered her betrayal, he had her torn limb from limb and fed to the sacred cats of Bastet. I felt her die, as surely as if my own limbs were being torn apart. My cries echoed through the temple, startling the priests and sending them fleeing in terror. But there was no fear in me, only a cold, calculating anger that would consume all of Egypt if it meant Neferet's death would not be in vain. For weeks, I pored over the ancient texts, deciphering spells long forgotten by mortal man. I communed with the spirits of the dead, learning their secrets and binding them to my will. And when the moon was full, and the stars aligned in accordance with the celestial map etched into the steel, I began my work. The tombs of the necropolis were my first targets. Deep within the heart of the land of the dead, I awakened the mummies, filling them with dark energy that pulsed like a second heart beneath their bandages. Their eyes opened, milky and unseeing, yet filled with an insatiable hunger for destruction. As they stumbled forth into the night, the ground shook with their terrible footsteps. The first wave was small but devastating. The villagers of Akhetaten were caught off guard, their screams echoing through the desert as they were devoured by the ravenous dead. News of the massacre reached the ears of Ramses, who dispatched his soldiers to deal with the disturbance. But they too fell before the relentless march of my undead army. As more tombs were awakened, panic spread throughout Egypt like wildfire. The people turned to their priests and prophets for guidance, but I had silenced many of them long ago, their bodies now animated by my dark power. Those who remained could offer no explanation for the walking dead or how to stop them. Only I held the key to victory or defeat, but Ramses was not so easily defeated. He rallied his most powerful generals and sorcerers, commanding them to find me and put an end to my dark reign. They sought me out in the depths of the night, their faces etched with determination and fear. But I was always one step ahead, my spies whispering warnings in my ear as they led my pursuers on wild goose chases through the desert. Still, Ramses would not yield. He redoubled his efforts, sending wave after wave of warriors against my undead horde. But for every soldier felled by my dark magic, 10 more rose from their graves to take up arms against the living. The battle lines blurred, and soon it seemed as if all of Egypt was engulfed in a never-ending dance of death. Through it all, I could feel Neferet's presence beside me, her spirit burning like a flame within my chest. She fueled my anger, fed my vengeance, and drove me ever onward towards my final goal, the destruction of Ramses Roman II himself. I knew that slaying him would not bring Neferet back from the dead, but it would grant her soul peace knowing that justice had been served, and so I bent every ounce of my considerable power towards that end, pouring all my hatred and rage into a spell powerful enough to strike down even a god, king, as Ramses' forces fought desperately to hold back the tide of undead flooding his capital city. I slipped past their defenses, shrouded in shadows and unseen by mortal eyes. The palace loomed before me like a behemoth of stone and gold, its towers reaching towards the heavens as if to defy the very gods themselves. But no such protection would save Ramses from my wrath. As I entered his throne room, his guards fell around me like wheat before the scythe, their lifeblood staining the polished marble floors. The Pharaoh stood tall amidst the carnage, his eyes burning with hatred as he challenged me. "Your reign ends tonight, Anhotek." He spat, his voice like thunder. "I will not let you bring Egypt to her knees." "We shall see who brings whom to their knees, great one," I replied, my tone mocking. for I have brought forth an age of darkness that even your mighty power cannot overcome." As we clashed, the very fabric of reality seemed to tear apart at the seams. Ramses called upon the might of his patron deity, Ra, and the air crackled with divine energy as a beam of pure sunlight struck down from above, aimed squarely at my heart. But I had prepared for such an eventuality, donning a cloak woven from the shadows of Osiris' underworld kingdom. It absorbed the deadly ray, leaving me unscathed but for the faint whisper of smoke that curled from its edges. Ramses' eyes widened in disbelief as I stepped forth from the ashes, my form growing taller, more terrible with each passing moment. "Impossible," he gasped, his breath ragged and his strength waning. "No, merely inevitable," I corrected him, my voice echoing like thunder. "You sealed your own doom when you took Neferet's life, Ramses, and now it is time for you to pay the price." With a roar that shook the very foundations of the palace, I unleashed my darkest spell upon him. Tendrils of shadow snaked through the air, wrapping around his limbs and pinning him in place. His eyes widened as he realized what was happening, but there was no escaping the power that held him fast. As Ramses struggled against his bonds, his skin began to pale, then grow gray with decay. Lines of age etched themselves deeply into his flesh, and his muscles wasted away until only bone remained. The great Pharaoh, once a mighty warrior and beloved ruler, now stood before me as little more than a mummified corpse. But still he refused to yield. His eyes burned with hatred even as they sank deeper into their sockets, and he summoned the last of his strength to strike at me with his divine scepter. It shattered against my breastplate, leaving me unharmed but for a single scratch across my cheek. I raised my hand towards him, my fingers curling like claws. "Enough," I whispered, and Ramses crumbled to dust before my eyes. And so the Pharaoh of Egypt lay defeated at my feet, his power shattered and his name forever besmirched by the tale of his ignoble end. News of his death spread quickly throughout the land, sown by the seeds of fear that had taken root in every heart. The people cowered in their homes, waiting for me to come and claim them next. But there was no satisfaction to be found in their terror, no joy in their despair. For all my triumphs, Neferet still lay cold and alone in her tomb, her spirit bound by the chains of death. And until she was freed, I could not rest. I returned to the necropolis, walking among the tombs as if in a dream. The undead hordes followed me like shadows, their milky eyes watching my every move with unspoken anticipation. When we reached Neferet's resting place, I dismissed them with a wave of my hand, dismissing their usefulness now that Ramses was no more. The silence was deafening as I stood before her tomb, the weight of centuries pressing down upon me like a physical force. But still I pushed on, driven by the desperate hope that somehow, someway, I could bring her back from the dead. I broke open her sarcophagus, my heart aching at the sight of her desiccated remains. Her once lovely face was now little more than a skull wrapped in tattered linen, her body nothing but dust and bones. Yet even so, there was beauty there still, the ghost of her former self lingering like perfume upon the wind. I laid my hands upon her chest, feeling the faint beat of her long, stilled heart beneath my fingertips, and then I began to sing. My voice echoed through the chamber, filling it with an ancient melody that spoke of love lost and found again, of life and death entwined. As I sang, light gathered around me like a storm cloud, growing brighter and more intense with each passing moment. When at last the final note faded away into silence, Neferet's form glowed like the sun itself. Her eyes opened slowly, their darkness replaced by a brilliant white light that seemed to pierce straight through to my very soul. "Anhotek," she whispered, her voice like music made manifest, "you have returned me to life, and I shall never leave you again." I promised, taking her hand in mine. Together, we would rule over Egypt as a king and queen united, bound together by love eternal. For though Ramses might be gone, the age of darkness he had helped usher in remained, and so too did our reign begin.